Hey, I'm Ryan from the Burnout Show, and in this video, I'm gonna show you how to replace a rear brake caliper on a 2008 Ford Explorer. My right rear caliper is broken and it doesn't work properly, so we are gonna go ahead and replace this. And typically when you do replace one caliper, you want to replace both calipers on either side. It's just better for the vehicle and will make your brakes work better and wear down more evenly. This isn't too complicated of a process, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get started and we'll walk you through it. First step is gonna be taking off the tire, so let's grab an impact in a socket or a lug wrench. If you're using a socket, it should be a 19mm socket if you have stock lug nuts. Once you get all the lug nuts off, just pull the wheel off and put that to the side. The first thing we're gonna do is disconnect the brake fluid hose from the caliper. In order to do that, we're gonna need a pair of vice grips to block it off and prevent the fluid from leaking out. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that off. You want that to be really tight so that it doesn't leak at all when you take it off. Once you pinch the hose, there's just gonna be one bolt right at the back right here. So it should be a 14mm, and that might be a little tight, so you might need some extra leverage on that. So before you take that bolt all the way out, you should get yourself some kind of a bucket that you can put underneath to catch any extra brake fluid that might drip out. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and thread this bolt off. Once you get the bolt that's holding the hose down out, from there we're gonna actually move on to the caliper bolts. So there's gonna be two bolts on the back of the caliper. They're gonna be 10mm, so you're gonna need a 10mm wrench or a 10mm socket and ratchet. We're just gonna need to loosen those next. So these are the two bolts right here that you're gonna need to remove. Like I said, they are both 10mm. So grab your wrench or your socket and make sure you go the right way and just loosen those up. And I like to break them both loose before I loosen one all the way. So from here, the caliper should be able to just pop off. It might take a little bit of force and a little bit of leverage, but basically you can just slide it off like that. So from here, we're gonna need to remove the brake pads from the caliper, unless of course your brake pads are low enough and you are also replacing the brake pads when you do the caliper. Mine, however, are pretty new still, so I'm reusing these pads, so I gotta take these off. The outside pad right here needs to come off first. And the way this works is it's basically just held on by a clamp right here. And so you effectively just need to pry it off, but it might be a little bit stuck, so this might be difficult. I have just got a long screwdriver here so that I can get some leverage on it. Basically what I just did first is I stuck the screwdriver down in between the pad and the caliper, just to get that a little bit unstuck, and that should make it a little bit easier for me to pry it off. Then with a little bit of force, a little bit of wiggle back and forth, got the outside pad off. The inside pad is much easier. It clamps into the inside of the piston, so you just need to push on both sides and it'll pop out. Now we can toss our old caliper away and get our new one. So right here I've got my new caliper. The first thing you should do is remove the plastic screw. Most of them will have a plastic screw or some sort of plug in here. So the first thing you want to do is just remove that. Take that out. Beyond that, you want to make sure that your slides are sliding properly. They should be because this is brand new, but it's always good to double check. Then from there, we're going to apply some grease onto the caliper before we reinstall the brake pads. So right here, I have some white lithium grease. Typically, you'd want to use some multi-purpose grease or whatever you basically have. Basically, when you're doing this, you want to grease every surface that the brake pads touch. However, you don't want to get any grease on the face of the pad that touches the rotor. Otherwise, the pads won't be able to, brake and stop the car like they're supposed to. For example, I'm going to grease up this surface right here. And basically what we're doing when we're greasing is we're trying to prevent any squeaks from happening. You don't need to apply a ton here, but you do want it to have a good solid coverage. Also just gonna go around the piston itself because one of the pads does sit right on that. And then I'll get this outside part too because metal on the pads do clamp onto there. Before you go to put the caliper back on, you do want to apply some grease to the metal piece that sits here and here. This will again help prevent squeaks when you're driving the car and will also help prevent any rust or other corrosion. From here, we are ready to install the brake pads again. And I'm actually gonna throw a little bit of grease onto this clamp on the inside pad. Not too much, just a little bit, so that it goes in and comes out easily. And we do have to install the inside pad first, the one that clamps into the caliper piston. The brake pads have these little brackets that hang off the sides. You want to point that to the top of the caliper. If this is the top, you want the brake pads pointed up like that, so it matches the curve of the caliper. Now, once you've got the inside pad installed, we'll grab the outside pad. Once again, the brackets have to go facing down. You just want to slide the gap between this bracket over the piece of metal on the caliper like that, and it should fit in pretty nicely. It might be a little bit snug, especially if you're using brand new pads. The clamp on here is going to be pressed really tight, so you might have to bend those back a little bit depending on how new this all is. So that's how you get the brake pads installed. And from here, we're ready to install the caliper back onto the rotor. So now we're going to install the brake hose back onto the new caliper. One thing to note when you're going to put this back on is to make sure that you still have 2 copper gaskets on either side of the brake hose. That's going to be important to make sure that this all seals up properly. So now I will just grab my new caliper. You want to make sure that the flat part of this square at the end of the brake hose goes up against the edge on the caliper, and just start threading that in. You don't have to tighten this all the way now, because we'll finish tightening that once we get the caliper installed so that we have more leverage on it. From here, we're ready to put the caliper actually back onto the rotor. And so you'll need your 2 bolts. I have 2 new bolts that came with my caliper. What you want to do is just make sure that you push the slides out far enough, because they might get caught on the holes that you screw into. So you just got to make sure that you have enough room there. So when you're actually going to put the caliper back on the car, this is going to be slightly different for either side. Right now we're on the right side of the car, and so we're going to need to put the bottom of the caliper in first, because there's a lip on the brake pad that has to sit down on the piece down here. So we'll just put the bottom part in first, and we might need to pull our slides out a bit so that they get over the lip. So this is going to take a little bit of finesse. Just go slow and take your time. Like I said, you're going to need to push these slides out pretty far in order to get them over the bracket. And while you're doing that, like I said, you got to put the bottom on first, and then you'll be able to just push the top on. And you want to make sure that this clip gets aligned properly underneath that piece. So from here, we're ready to put our bolts back in and actually tighten everything up. So I'm just going to go ahead and slide these bolts in. For me, these bolts, the old ones were 10 millimeter. The new ones, however, are 12 millimeters. So just be careful of that. Take notice of whether or not they changed if you're using new ones. And we'll tighten these up pretty good. You just want to get that nice and tight. So now that we've got those 2 caliper bolts tightened, we're going to go ahead and tighten the bolt holding in the brake line. If you changed the bolt, then that bolt size might have changed once again, so you just have to take note of that. And there we go. Now we can remove the vice grips off of our line. So from here, we're basically going to need to bleed the brakes, and that will cause the piston to compress the pads onto the rotor, which is what allows you to stop. Right now, the piston itself is fully pressed in, so there's a lot of slack on this caliper, and that won't be doing anything when you press the brake pedal. So that's going to be it for this video. However, we do already have another video on the channel about how to bleed brakes, so that'll be linked up in the top right corner right now. You can go ahead and click that and go watch that to finish up this job here. So if you found this video helpful, make sure you hit the like button and definitely subscribe for more great tutorial content like this. And while you're down there hitting that like button and subscribing, because I know you went down there to hit the like button and subscribe, you should also check out our memberships. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a paid subscription to our channel. There's gonna be a blue join button right next to the subscribe button. You can click on that and learn all about it. Tons of really great fun perks for you guys. So make sure you check that out while you're down there. And that's gonna do it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I hope this helped.